Take off your badge and get out of my sight. Colonel Richard Hayes slammed his hand on the table so hard the room shook. He pointed his finger directly into Commander Maya Carter's face in front of admirals, in front of Pentagon officials, in front of every person whose opinion would shape the rest of her career. His face was red. His voice was shaking. Not because she had failed, because she had succeeded in a way that exposed every lie he had told to protect himself. She had saved 34 lives. He wanted her destroyed for it. Subscribe right now, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches, and do not move, because what those 34 men do next will leave you breathless. There is a moment in every person's life when they are forced to choose between what is safe and what is right. For most people, that moment comes quietly. Maybe it is a conversation at work or a difficult decision inside a family. Maybe it is small and no one outside the room ever knows it happened. But for Commander Maya Carter, that moment came in the middle of a firefight in enemy territory with bullets hitting the ground around her boots. One of her men bleeding out in the dirt and a colonel 3,000 miles away screaming at her through a radio to keep moving forward into the jaws of a trap he refused to admit he had walked them into. And she had to decide right then, with no time and no good options, who she was, not who she wanted to be, not who she had planned to be when she was young and full of ambition and ideas about honor, who she actually was when the world stripped everything else away. This is the story of what she chose, and it is the story of what happened when 34 of the most dangerous and disciplined soldiers in the history of the United States military decided they agreed with her. Maya Carter grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a house where discipline was not a concept. It was a practice. Her father was a retired Marine, not the kind of retired Marine who talks about the old days at every dinner table, the kind who woke before sunrise every morning without an alarm, who kept his shoes polished even when he had nowhere to go, who believed that the character you built when no one was watching was the only character that mattered. He never pushed Maya toward the military. He never sat her down and told her she should serve. He just lived in a way that made service look like the most natural thing in the world. She watched him and she understood. Some people are built for comfort. Some people are built for something harder. Maya entered the Naval Academy at 18. She graduated near the top of her class. She passed every physical standard, every academic standard, every psychological evaluation. She earned the right to attempt the most demanding selection process in military special operations. And she passed that too. Not easily, not without pain, not without moments when every rational part of her brain told her to quit, that it was not worth it, that no one would judge her for stopping. But she did not stop, because she was not doing it to prove something to other people. She was doing it because she could not live with herself if she didn't see it through. When she joined SEAL Team 6 and was assigned to Black Squadron at Joint Special Operations Command in Fort Bragg, Virginia, she was not met with celebration. She was met with something harder and more honest than celebration. She was met with silence, the kind of silence that means nothing has been decided yet. The men of Black Squadron were not unfriendly. They were careful. They had built something together, a team, a culture, a set of shared standards, and they were not going to hand her a seat at the table simply because someone with rank told them to. She was going to have to earn it. She understood that. She didn't fight it. She didn't complain about it. She showed up early. She stayed late. She trained harder than she needed to. She asked questions when she didn't know something, and she gave straight answers when she did. She never pretended to be something she wasn't. She never inflated her experience or claimed credit for things that weren't hers. And one day, several months into her assignment, Chief Nathan Brooks, who was the most respected NCO in Black Squadron, and the kind of man who could silence a room just by walking into it, turned to her during a training debrief and said without any preamble or ceremony, "You're solid, Carter." 2 words. That was all. But from Nathan Brooks, those 2 words meant more than any medal. The team called her Carter. Not commander, not ma'am. Carter. It was not disrespect. It was the opposite. It was what they called each other. She had crossed the line from officer to teammate. She would spend years with these men. She would run missions in places the public would never know about in the dark, with rules of engagement that shifted by the minute, in environments where the wrong decision made in the fraction of a second could get everyone killed. She would learn their names, their voices, the way they breathed when they were focused, the way they moved when they were afraid but wouldn't show it. She learned who was steady under fire and who needed a word in their ear to pull them back to center. She learned who had kids waiting at home and who had no one, and she understood that both of those facts created weight a commander needed to respect. She became the officer who carried a wounded teammate through 3 floors of a collapsing building during a hostage rescue in North Africa. She became the commander who stayed at the last extraction point alone in the dark covering fire for a team that was moving too slowly to reach the helicopter, making sure every single one of them was off the ground before she stepped onto the aircraft herself. She was not a symbol. She did not think about what she represented. She only thought about the people on her left and her right. That was her entire philosophy of leadership, and it never changed. But inside the offices where careers were managed and futures were decided, philosophy was not the currency that mattered. Numbers mattered. Reports mattered. Who you knew and how you presented yourself mattered. And in that world, Colonel Richard Hayes was exceptional. Hayes had been in the military for over 2 decades. He was intelligent, genuinely deeply intelligent, and no one who worked with him would deny that. He could read a strategic situation with speed and clarity. He understood logistics. He understood the political dimensions of military operations in a way that many pure combat leaders did not. But somewhere along the way, and no one could point to the exact moment his intelligence had turned inward. It had stopped serving the mission and started serving himself. Hayes wanted to be a general. That was not a secret. He had wanted it for years, and he had been building toward it methodically, collecting the right assignments in the right relationships, in the right statistics, the way another man might collect art. Missions that succeeded became his successes. Missions that failed became someone else's failures. He was careful. He was practiced. And he was very, very good at protecting himself. When he was assigned to oversee special operations planning at JSOC, he and Maya began working together. And within the first month, he recognized something about her that made him uncomfortable. She was not afraid of him. Most people were. Not because Hayes was cruel. He rarely raised his voice, and he was polite in that precise, measured way that powerful men often are. People feared him because they understood that he held their careers in his hands and that he did not hesitate to use that leverage. But Maya looked at him the way she looked at everyone directly, without performance, without the small deferential gestures that people in subordinate positions had learned to offer. She listened carefully to what he said. She asked questions when his reasoning didn't hold up. And when she disagreed with him, she said so. Not rudely, not aggressively, but clearly. "Sir, I think there's a problem with this intelligence assessment. Sir, I'd like to request additional reconnaissance before we commit to this timeline. Sir, my team has concerns about the route." Hayes heard these things and smiled and nodded and wrote them down in his notes. And he waited. He knew with the patience of a man who had been playing this game for a long time that eventually she would go too far. That eventually there would be a moment where her refusal to simply comply would become undeniable, visible, undeniable to everyone watching. And then he could move. The first real clash between them came during a planning session for a series of operations, targeting a network of arms dealers operating across the Syria-Turkey border region. The intelligence package was thick and had been compiled over several months. On paper, it looked solid, but Maya had spent 2 days reading through it. Every page, every source citation, every satellite image, and something didn't add up. She brought her concerns to Hayes in a private meeting first. She didn't embarrass him publicly. She sat across from him in his office with her notes in front of her and walked him through what she had found. "Several of these source reports are circular," she said. "They're citing each other. When you trace them back to the original intelligence, you find 2 sources, and those 2 sources have reliability assessments of questionable. The satellite imagery shows a facility that looks active, but the pattern of movement doesn't match what you'd expect from an operational weapons storage site. It looks staged." Hayes listened. He let her finish. Then he said, "Commander Carter, this intelligence package was compiled by professionals with far more experience in this region than either of us." "I understand that, sir." "Then trust the process." "I do trust the process. I'm asking us to run it again." He was quiet for a moment. "Your concern is noted," he said. "The mission planning continues." She left his office knowing that her concern had not been noted at all. It had been dismissed. And that gap between what Hayes said and what Hayes meant was something she started tracking very carefully. The weeks that followed were tense, not openly tense, not the kind of tension that breaks into arguments. The quiet kind, the kind where two people understand each other perfectly and neither of them says it out loud. Hayes began copying her superior officers on routine communications in ways that were technically normal but functionally pointed. He began scheduling briefings at times that conflicted with her training sessions. He began referring to her in small ways in front of others as Commander Carter, with a specific inflection that managed to communicate skepticism without ever saying a skeptical word. He was building a file on her, not the kind of file with documents, the kind that lives in people's memories. The impression file, the one that fills the space before the question, "Carter, what do you make of her?" I was making sure that when that question was asked, the answer would carry a faint shadow of doubt. Maya knew what he was doing, and she continued doing her job. Because the other option, becoming smaller, becoming quieter, becoming the version of herself that would make Hayes comfortable, was not something she was willing to consider. Nathan Brooks noticed the pressure she was under. He was not someone who talked about feelings easily or often, but one evening after a late training session, when the room had cleared out and it was just the two of them reviewing equipment, he said, "He's coming for you, Carter." She didn't look up from what she was doing. "I know. You planning to do anything about it?" "Keep doing my job." Brooks was quiet. Then, "That might not be enough." "It's all I've got," she said. He nodded. He understood. The mission briefing for Operation Silent Horizon happened on a Tuesday morning in a windowless room at JSOC headquarters. Hayes stood at the front of the room with the confidence of a man presenting a plan he considered not only correct but elegant. The target was a compound near the Syrian border. Intelligence indicated it was being used as a coordination hub by a weapons trafficking network with ties to multiple hostile organizations. The plan was a nighttime helicopter insertion, fast entry capture of key personnel, rapid extraction. Hayes called it clean, surgical, a low-risk, high-reward operation. Maya sat in the third row and looked at the satellite imagery projected on the screen. Something was wrong. She could feel it before she could name it. She looked at the compound layout, the roads leading to it, the pattern of activity around the perimeter over the past 72 hours. Then she understood what she was seeing. The compound looked too clean. Not suspicious clean, not the kind of clean that comes from operational security. A different kind, the kind that comes from someone knowing they are being watched and removing everything that should be there. "Sir," she said, raising her hand, "I have a question about the intelligence." Hayes turned. The room noticed. "Commander Carter, the satellite imagery from the last 3 days shows almost no activity at this location. Previous assessments noted regular vehicle movement and personnel circulation. That pattern has disappeared completely. Can you speak to what analysts believe accounts for that change?" Hayes paused. "The network may have increased operational security in response to our collection activity. Or they know we're coming." The room was very quiet. Hayes's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. "That assessment is speculative and not supported by the intelligence. I'd like to request additional reconnaissance before we insert." "Your request is noted. The mission proceeds on schedule." He turned back to the screen. Maya sat very still. She looked at the image of the compound. She thought about Nathan Brooks, about her medic, Corporal James Tran, who had a daughter who was 7 years old, and who had a picture of her taped to the inside of his locker. About the sniper on her team, Petty Officer Derek Holt, who was 3 months from retirement, and who had been talking for weeks about the fishing trip he was going to take with his son. She thought about all of them, and she made a decision. If she was wrong about the compound, she would deal with the consequences. But if she was right and she didn't say anything, and something happened to her team, she would never recover from that. She could not live with silence that cost someone their life. After the briefing, she pulled Brooks aside. "Something's off," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I saw it too. The compound is clean. Too clean." "Agreed. Hayes isn't going to change the timeline." Brooks crossed his arms. "So what do we do?" "We prepare for the possibility that we're walking into something that isn't what the intelligence says it is," she said. "We talk to the team. We plan alternate extraction routes. We make sure everyone knows what we do if the situation doesn't match the briefing. And if Hayes finds out you're preparing for a scenario he didn't authorize? She looked at Brooks. Then he finds out. They spent the next 6 hours running what Hayes didn't know about and what Maya didn't have permission to do officially. She briefed her team not just on the planned mission, but on the questions she had about the intelligence. She told them honestly what she had seen in the satellite imagery and what she thought it might mean. She didn't tell them to be afraid. No, she told them to be ready for anything, because ready was the only thing that had ever kept them alive. Holt, the sniper, listened to her walk through the alternate extraction routes. When she finished, he said, "You think it's a trap?" "I think it might be." "And Hayes is running the mission." Holt nodded slowly. "Then I guess we trust you." "You shouldn't trust me blindly," she said. "I'm telling you what I see. You make your own assessment." "Carter," he said with a small, dry smile. "We already did." The team suited up in the dark. They loaded their equipment. They reviewed their assignments. They did all the things they had done hundreds of times before. But that night, every one of them knew they were walking into something uncertain. And they walked in anyway, because that was who they were. And because Maya Carter was leading them, she was the first one onto the aircraft. She sat near the door the way she always did, watching her team load up around her. She watched their faces. She watched the way Brooks settled into his seat with his hands resting on his knees, utterly composed. She watched Tron check his medical kit one more time, running his fingers over the contents with the focus of a man who understood that those supplies were the difference between someone living and someone not. She watched Holt stare at the ceiling of the helicopter with the particular calm of someone who had gone so far past fear that they had come out the other side. These were her people. Whatever was waiting in the dark, they were going into it together. The helicopter banked south, and Maya Carter looked out into the night and felt the weight of what she had chosen to be. Not a symbol, not a story, not a poster or a headline, just a commander, a person standing between her people and whatever came next. She tightened the strap on her kit, closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, and then opened them again. Ready. The aircraft crossed the border into darkness, and what was waiting for them in that darkness was exactly what Maya Carter had feared, and exactly what Colonel Richard Hayes had told everyone would not be there. The landing was clean, the insertion point was exactly where it was supposed to be. The team moved out in silence, spreading across the terrain in the practice patterns they had rehearsed so many times. The movements lived in their muscles rather than their minds. Brooks was on her left, Tran was behind her. Holt moved to the high ground without being told because he never needed to be told. The compound was 400 meters ahead. No lights, no movement, nothing. Maya moved forward and the silence pressed against her like something physical. She had operated in quiet environments before. She had worked in areas with no noise, no life, no sign of anything. But this was a different quality of quiet. This was the quiet of something holding its breath. She raised her fist. The team stopped. She stood very still and looked at the compound. And she felt with a certainty she could not explain in words, but could not dismiss that something inside that darkness was looking back at her. She reached for her radio. "Something is wrong," she said. "We need to..." The world came apart. The first explosion hit 30 meters to her left. The ground shook and light filled the dark, and the silence broke open into something enormous and terrifying. And human voices were shouting, and weapons were firing, and Maya was moving before conscious thought caught up to her body. "Contact multiple positions," someone shouted. Gunfire was coming from 3 sides, from underground, from positions that had not been visible in any satellite image because they had been constructed below the surface, hidden from every surveillance asset they had. The compound was a kill zone, and they were in the middle of it. Maya grabbed Brooks by the shoulder. "Casualties. Tran is hit. It's not good. Wilson has a leg wound. 2 others have minor injuries. Holt. He's in position. He's giving us cover. We need to move. Hayes is ordering us to push forward." She looked at Brooks. He looked at her. In that moment, in the middle of fire and noise and chaos, something passed between them that didn't need words. She reached for the radio, and what came through on the other end was the voice of a man 3,000 miles away who was not looking at what she was looking at and was not hearing what she was hearing and was making a decision that could kill every person around her. "Stay inside the compound," Hayes said. "Push forward. Secure the target." Maya stared at the radio in her hand. Tran was on the ground. She could hear him. She looked at the compound ahead. She looked at the three directions the gunfire was coming from. She did the math that Hayes was not doing, and she made her choice. There was no hesitation. There was no dramatic pause. There was only the clarity that comes when you know exactly who you are and exactly what you will and will not do. All units, she said into the radio, her voice completely level. We are aborting the mission. Move to alternate extraction point. Bravo. Do it now. The radio exploded. Hayes's voice came through, stripped of its usual polish, and what was underneath was not authority. It was panic dressed up as anger. Carter, you are disobeying a direct order. You will be court-martialed. You will lose everything. Do you understand me, everything? She listened. She heard his voice. She looked at Tron on the ground, and she looked at Brooks, who was already moving, already pulling people into position, already doing the thing that needed to be done. And she pressed the radio button one more time. Sir, she said, if following your order means sacrificing my entire team for a mistake you will not admit you made, then yes, I am refusing the order. Charge me when we get back. We are coming home. She dropped the radio and started moving, and her team moved with her, not because she ordered them, because they believed her. They fought their way out through terrain that should have been impossible to cross under fire. They moved in the patterns Maya had drilled with them. Holt gave them the cover he had positioned himself to give. Brooks held the left flank. Maya moved through them, checking every position, keeping every person visible in her mind, making sure no one fell behind. Tran was being carried by two operators. He was conscious barely. He said something through his pain that no one could quite hear, but that his teammates understood was directed at Maya. And she heard it and she said, I know, we've got you. Keep breathing. They made extraction point Bravo. The helicopter came in. Every member of Black Squadron got on it. Maya was the last. She stepped onto the aircraft and the helicopter lifted, and the darkness fell away below her, and she leaned back against the fuselage and closed her eyes. Around her, her team said nothing. There was nothing to say. They were alive. She had made them alive. And in the morning, she was going to face everything that came with that decision. But that was the morning. Right now in the dark in the aircraft with 34 people breathing around her, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She did not feel like a hero. She felt like a commander. She felt like herself. And she knew that no matter what Richard Hayes did to her tomorrow, no matter what rank they took or what they accused her of or what they tried to make her into, they could not take the thing that actually mattered. Because the thing that actually mattered was 34 people on this helicopter. And she brought them home. Every single one. The helicopter touched down at 0347 in the morning. No fanfare. No welcome. No one standing on the tarmac to tell them they had done something remarkable. Just the sound of rotors slowing down and the smell of fuel and the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical effort, but from the kind of mental weight that settles into your bones when you have spent hours making decisions that other people's lives depended on. Maya was the last one off the aircraft. She always was. She stepped onto the ground and took one breath and then another, and she looked at her team moving around her. Some of them limping, some of them helping others, all of them alive. And she felt something she could not name and did not try to. Corporal James Tran was being moved to the medical facility on a stretcher. His color was wrong, his breathing was shallow, but he was breathing. Maya walked alongside the stretcher for 30 feet until the medics told her they needed space, and she stepped back and watched them carry him through the doors. She stood there for a moment after the doors closed. Chief Nathan Brooks appeared at her shoulder. He's going to make it, Brooks said. You don't know that. No, he said, but I believe it, and right now, that's what I've got. She turned and looked at him. His face was cut above the left eye. He hadn't mentioned it. He wasn't the kind of man who mentioned things like that. Hayes is going to move fast, she said. I know. He's going to have paperwork on this before the sun comes up. Probably already does, Brooks said. Man like that, he had the paperwork ready before we even boarded the aircraft. He just needed a reason to file it. Maya looked at the doors where Tran had disappeared. I gave him a reason. You gave him an excuse, Brooks said. There's a difference. A reason means you did something wrong. An excuse means he needed something to hide behind. She looked at him. He shrugged. I've been in this uniform for 22 years, Carter. I know the difference between a commander and a politician wearing one. Hayes is the second kind, and the second kind always moves fast when they feel cornered. Maya nodded. She went to debrief her team. The room where they gathered was small and fluorescent and smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long. The operators came in one by one, dropping into chairs or leaning against walls, their gear still on, most of them, because taking it off felt like a decision they hadn't made yet. Maya stood at the front of the room and looked at them. Petty Officer Derek Holt sat in the back corner with his arms crossed and his eyes sharp the way they always were, like he was still watching an 800-meter field. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb, the breacher, had his hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee, and he was staring at the floor with the specific expression of a man who was doing math he didn't like the answer to. The others were scattered around them, quiet waiting. "I want to say something before this becomes official," Maya said. Nobody moved. "What happened tonight was not your fault. The intelligence was wrong. The compound was prepared for us. Someone knew we were coming, and whoever knew that it was not anyone in this room." She paused. "I made a decision to abort. I made that decision because continuing the mission meant advancing into a prepared ambush with wounded personnel and insufficient ammunition. I would make that decision again." Silence. Then Holt said from the back of the room, "Carter." She looked at him. "We know why you made the call," he said. "We were there." "I know you were." "Then stop explaining it to us like we need convincing." She almost smiled. "Fair." Webb looked up from his coffee. "What happens now?" "Hayes files a report. It goes up the chain. There will be an inquiry. And you, I answer for my decision." Webb set down his cup. "We answer for our decisions too. We were there. We heard the same radio traffic you did." "This isn't your fight, Webb." "Carter." He looked at her steadily, and there was something in his face that was not anger and not sentiment, but something older and quieter than either. "With respect, you don't get to decide whose fight this is." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. "Go get some sleep," she said. "All of you. Whatever comes next, you need to be rested for it." They filed out slowly. Brooks was the last one. He stopped at the door. "Get some sleep yourself," he said. "I will." He looked at her like he didn't believe her. He was right not to. She sat in that room for another hour after everyone left. She sat in the quiet with a cup of coffee going cold in front of her, and she went through every decision she had made in the past 12 hours, not looking for errors, not second-guessing herself, but making sure she could account for every moment. Making sure that when the inquiry came, and it was coming, she had no illusions about that. She could stand in front of whoever was asking and answer every question without looking away. She could. She was certain of that. What she was less certain about was whether it would matter, because Richard Hayes was not interested in the truth of what had happened. He was interested in the story he could build around what had happened. And a man with his access and his relationships and his 23 years of carefully constructed political capital could build a very convincing story. She knew this. She had known it since the moment she pressed the radio button and said the words that could not be unsaid. The sun came up at 5:42. Hayes filed his report at 5:58. She found out about it from her JAG officer, Captain Diana Reyes, who appeared at her door at 6:15, looking like a woman who had been awake for a very long time and had read something she wished she hadn't. "How bad?" Maya asked. Reyes sat down and put a folder on the table. "He's charging you with insubordination, dereliction of duty, and conduct unbecoming an officer." Maya looked at the folder. She didn't open it. "He's also requesting an immediate suspension of your command authority pending the outcome of the inquiry," Reyes continued. "And he's contacted 2 members of the Senate Armed Services Committee." He moved fast. "He had this ready," Reyes said. "Carter, this was prepared in advance. The language in this report, nobody writes like this after one night. This has been drafted and revised. He was waiting for a reason to file it." "I know." Reyes looked at her carefully. "You knew he was going to do this." "I knew he needed to protect himself. I gave him the opportunity to do it." "You could have—" "What?" Maya said. "Obeyed the order, pushed my team forward into a kill zone and hoped we somehow fought our way through it." She shook her head. "No, I couldn't have." Reyes was quiet. "I know what you're going to say," Maya said. "You're going to tell me about the legal strategy, about the best way to present my case, about what I should and shouldn't say in the inquiry." "Yes," Reyes said. "That's my job. And I'm going to listen to everything you tell me," Maya said. "But I need you to understand something first. I'm not going into that inquiry to minimize what I did or to frame it strategically or to make it look like something other than what it was. I refused a direct order. I will say that. I will explain why. And whatever they decide after that, I will accept. Rhea stared at her. That is a terrible legal strategy, she said. I know, Maya said, but it's the only one I can live with. The formal inquiry was scheduled for 48 hours later. In the time between, the base was not quiet. It never is when something like this happens. People talk. They always do. And in a community as tight and interconnected as special operations, the talking happens fast, and it happens everywhere, in hallways and in mess halls and in the quiet corners of planning rooms where people think no one is listening. The story of what happened on the mission spread the way these stories always spread, in fragments and partial truths, in the versions that people told depending on what they had heard and who they had heard it from. Hayes's version moved through official channels. He had the channels, he used them. His version was clean and simple. A commander had lost her nerve under pressure, refused an order, abandoned a mission, and endangered the credibility of the entire command structure. Maya's version moved differently. It moved through the operators themselves, person to person, the way things move in a community where people have stood next to each other in the dark and know what it means when someone says they were there. On the second morning, Marcus Webb came to find Maya. He knocked on her door at 7 in the morning. She answered it in uniform because she had been in uniform since she woke up, and she had not slept much, and she looked exactly like someone who was carrying something heavy and refusing to put it down. Something you need to see, Webb said. He handed her a printed document. She looked at it. It was a copy of an intelligence assessment, dated 3 weeks before Operation Silent Horizon, marked priority, addressed to Colonel Richard Hayes. She read it. She read it again. The assessment stated clearly in language that left no room for interpretation that the compound identified as the primary target for the operation had been flagged by 2 independent sources as a possible deception. That enemy elements in the region were known to be aware of American surveillance patterns, that the recommended course of action was additional reconnaissance and independent source verification before any direct action was authorized. Hayes had received this document. He had read it, and he had not shared it with anyone else. Where did you get this? She asked. I can't tell you that, Webb said. Marcus, Carter, I genuinely cannot tell you that, he said, because the person who got it to me has a family, and I'm not going to put them in Hayes's crosshairs. But what I can tell you is that it's real. It came from the right place, and it needs to be in the hands of the right person before that inquiry starts. She looked at the document in her hands. This was the thing. This was the piece that changed the shape of everything. He knew, she said. He knew, Dan. He sent them in anyway. He had a promotion review in 30 days, Webb said. He needed a win, a clean, fast, high-profile win, and he decided. Webb stopped himself. His jaw tightened. He decided that the risk was worth it. The risk, Maya said quietly. He decided that our lives were worth the risk. Webb said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was adequate to what that meant. She looked at the document one more time. Then she picked up the phone and called Diana Reyes. I need you here, she said, right now. And bring someone from the Inspector General's office if you can. Reyes was there in 20 minutes. She read the document standing up and did not sit down when she finished. She read it again. She turned to Maya with an expression that was something between fury and careful professional focus. This changes everything, Reyes said. I know. He withheld critical intelligence from mission planning. He sent your team into a known risk environment without disclosure. I know what it means, Diana. This isn't just about your inquiry anymore, Reyes said. This is criminal negligence. This is potentially... I know, Maya said again more quietly. I know what it is, and I know what it means for him. But right now I need you to focus on making sure that document is in the right hands through the right channels before Hayes has any opportunity to make it disappear. Reyes looked at her. You're protecting the process. I'm making sure it works the way it's supposed to, even after what he did to you. Because of what he did to my team, Maya said. This isn't about me. It was never about me. The document went to the Inspector General's office that afternoon. Hayes was not yet aware of it. He was in his office, Maya was told, reviewing the inquiry format with his own legal team. He had a carefully prepared presentation. He had witnesses lined up. He had 3 senior officers who were prepared to corroborate his account of the radio communications from the night of the mission. He had built his case well. He just didn't know about the document. Not yet. 40 hours after the mission, James Tran woke up. Maya found out from his lead surgeon at noon. She was in the middle of a preparation session with Reyes when her phone buzzed, and she looked at it and put it down and sat quietly for a moment. "Good news," Reyes asked. "Tran is awake." Reyes closed her folder. "Go," she said. "We're not done. We're done enough for now. Go." Maya went. The medical facility was 2 buildings over. She walked there fast and was buzzed through the door by a nurse who recognized her and waved her down the hall. Tran was in the second room on the left. He was pale. He had tubes in his arm and monitors tracking his vitals, and he looked like someone who had been through something serious and had come out the other side with the kind of tiredness that goes deeper than sleep can fix. But his eyes were open. And when Maya walked into the room, he looked at her and something crossed his face that was not quite a smile but was in the same family. "Commander," he said. His voice was rough. "Trana," she said. She pulled a chair to the edge of his bed and sat down. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot," he said. "You did get shot." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "I knew you'd get us out." She looked at him. "When everything went sideways out there," he said. "I wasn't scared. Not the way you'd think, because I knew you were going to make a call. I knew you were going to do the thing that kept us alive." He paused. "I've had commanders who I wasn't sure about, who I thought maybe when it came down to it, they'd make the wrong call. You were never one of those." Maya sat with that. "You've got a daughter," she said. "Emma, yeah. She needs to know her dad is okay." "Called her this morning," he said. "Well, my wife called her. I wasn't really in a state to hold a phone." He shifted carefully. "She asked my wife if the lady who runs my team was okay." Maya looked up. "Emma asked if you were okay," Tran said. "Because I talk about you. I tell her about the commander who makes sure everyone gets home. She wanted to know you were safe." Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell Emma I'm fine." "I will," Tran said. "You're going to be fine right after the inquiry. One way or another," she said. He looked at her carefully. "Carter." "Yeah. Whatever they do to you in that room, whatever Hayes says about you, every person who was on that helicopter knows exactly what you did and exactly why you did it." He held her gaze. "That's not nothing. That's everything." She nodded. She stayed another 10 minutes and then she walked back to prepare for the next day. That night, Brooks knocked on her door at 2200. She opened it. He was in civilian clothes, which was unusual enough that she noticed it. "Walk with me," he said. They walked along the perimeter road that ran behind the main buildings. It was a route that both of them knew well, a place where people went when they needed to talk without being in a room. "I've been talking to the team," Brooks said. "What are they saying?" "They're angry," he said. "Not scared, not confused, angry. The clean kind of angry where you know exactly what the problem is and you know exactly what it deserves." "I don't want them doing anything that puts them in Hayes's crosshairs," she said. "With respect," Brooks said. "You don't get to decide that either." She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. "Carter," he said, "these men have deployed with you. They've bled next to you. They've carried each other and been carried by you. And they have watched you make the hardest calls anyone in this uniform has to make. And they have never, not once, seen you make those calls for the wrong reasons." His voice was level, but there was something underneath it that was not level at all. "You protected them out there. All of them. And tomorrow you're going to walk into that room and stand in front of people who were not there, and you are going to be asked to explain yourself to someone who put your entire team in danger to advance his own career." She didn't say anything. "We're not going to let you do that alone," Brooks said. "Nathan, we've already decided," he said. "I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Because that's what family does." She looked at him in the dark. She wanted to tell him not to risk it. She wanted to tell him that she could handle it, that it was her problem to carry, that they had done enough, and she was not going to let them put themselves in the line of fire again on her behalf. But she looked at him, and she understood that he was not offering. He was telling her who they were, and she was not going to insult him by arguing with it. "Okay," she said. He nodded. They walked back in silence. The inquiry was scheduled for 0900. At 0830, every member of Black Squadron was in uniform. They gathered without being told to. They came from the barracks and from the medical facility and from wherever they had spent the night, and they came in their dress uniforms, which none of them had planned to wear that morning, and they came to the building where the inquiry was being held, and they stood outside it. Not loudly, not with signs or with speeches, just there. 34 operators, standing in the morning air in their dress uniforms with their badges on their chests, waiting. When Maya arrived and saw them, she stopped walking. She stood there for a moment. Brooks was at the front of the group. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, directly, without performance, without anything extra. "We're with you," he said. That was all. She nodded. She did not trust herself to say more than that. They went inside. The inquiry room was large and formal, the kind of room designed to remind everyone in it of the weight of an official process. There was a long table at the front where the inquiry panel sat 3 senior officers, none of whom Maya knew well, all of whom had the particular careful expression of people who understood they were about to hear something complicated. Hayes was already there. I was in dress uniform, perfect every element of it, precise and deliberate. He looked confident. He looked like a man who had prepared well and knew it. He looked at Maya when she entered, and his expression did not change. But his eyes moved to the operators filing in behind her. They kept filing in, and Hayes's expression began to develop a very small crack at its foundation. The senior member of the panel, a 2-star general named Okafor, that Maya had met twice before and found difficult to read, looked at the assembled operators and then looked at Maya. "Commander Carter," General Okafor said, "is there a reason your entire unit is present for this inquiry?" Maya looked at the general steadily. "Sir, they are here voluntarily as potential witnesses to the events under review." Okafor looked at them again. Then he nodded slowly, and something in his expression shifted slightly in a way that Maya could not quite read. Hayes stood up. "General Okafor, with respect, this is irregular. These personnel are not scheduled as witnesses." "I'll determine what's regular, Colonel," Okafor said. Hayes sat back down. The crack in his foundation widened. Maya sat at the table and looked at the panel and took a breath. She was ready. Whatever happened in the next several hours was going to be the truth. The whole truth, everything she had held back for nothing and no one. And somewhere in the building, in a file that the Inspector General's office had received the previous afternoon, there was a document with Hayes's name on it and a date 3 weeks before the mission. Hayes did not know about that document yet, but he was going to. He was going to find out in a room full of people. I was going to find out when the moment came that he could not prepare for, the moment that his careful, constructed, revised, and polished story could not survive. Maya had been in enough situations to know what that moment felt like when it was coming. She sat straight in her chair. She kept her hands still on the table. She looked at the panel, and she waited for the truth to do what the truth does when it is finally given a room and a voice and the chance to be heard. Colonel Hayes began to speak, and somewhere behind Maya 34, operators sat in their dress uniforms and said nothing. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be present. Colonel Richard Hayes was a man who had spent 23 years learning how to own a room. He knew how to stand. He knew how to project his voice so it filled the space without strain. He knew how to make eye contact with each person at the panel table in a way that felt personal, that felt like he was speaking to them individually rather than performing for a group. He had done this 100 times. In promotion boards and congressional briefings, in after-action reviews, where the story needed to be shaped carefully before it hardened into record. He was good at this. He was genuinely, professionally, disturbingly good at this. He opened his case against Commander Maya Carter at 0912 seconds, and he did it the way a surgeon opens a patient, with precision, with confidence, and with the absolute certainty that he knew exactly what was inside and exactly what needed to be removed. "General Okafor," Hayes said, standing at the front of the room with his hands clasped behind his back and his uniform immaculate. "What you are going to hear today is a straightforward case of command failure. A senior officer under pressure in a combat environment lost confidence in her mission parameters and made a unilateral decision to abort an authorized operation. In doing so, she refused a direct order from her superior officer, exposed her unit to additional risk during an unauthorized extraction maneuver, and compromised the operational integrity of a mission that had strategic importance beyond what her rank entitled her to evaluate." He paused. He let that settle. "This is not a complicated case," he continued. "Commander Carter disobeyed an order. The facts are documented. The radio transmissions are recorded. I will submit both into evidence. What I ask this panel to consider is not merely the specific incident, but what it represents. When a commander in a special operations environment decides that her personal judgment supersedes the chain of command, the entire foundation of military order is at risk. He sat down. The room was quiet. General Okafor made a note. The two officers beside him, a one-star named Brennan and a full colonel named Yates, did the same. Maya sat straight in her chair and did not look at Hayes. She looked at the panel. She kept her breathing even. She had listened to every word he said, and she had noted the things he did not say, the gaps in his account that were as informative as what he included, and she was holding all of it in order ready. Okafor looked at her. Commander Carter, you'll have the opportunity to present your account in full. Before we proceed to that, I want to ask Colonel Hayes a direct question. He turned to Hayes. Colonel, in your assessment of Commander Carter's decision to abort the mission, was the unit taking casualties at the time of the order to push forward? Hayes did not hesitate. 2 personnel had sustained injuries, yes. However, in special operations environments, the presence of casualties does not automatically. Were those injuries life-threatening? A beat, small but there. 1 injury was assessed as serious. By whom was it assessed? By the unit's medical personnel. And you received that assessment in real time during the radio communications. I received information regarding casualties, yes. So you were aware, Okafor said evenly, that the unit had a critically wounded operator and your order was to push the assault forward. Hayes' jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The strategic objective required. Thank you, Colonel, Okafor said. That's what I needed to know. It was a small moment. It lasted perhaps 15 seconds. But every person in that room felt the weight of it. The specific gravity of an experienced general asking a very careful question and getting an answer that said more than the person giving it intended. In the row behind Maya, Marcus Webb shifted in his seat. She felt it without looking. She felt the whole row shift slightly, the way 34 people can move almost simultaneously when they hear something that confirms what they already knew. Hayes felt it too, and that was the first crack that the room could see. Maya presented her account beginning at 0938. She stood at the front of the room and she did not use notes. She spoke in the clear, direct way she had always spoken, without embellishment and without deflection. She described the intelligence concerns she had raised prior to the mission. She described the satellite imagery that had troubled her and the specific request for additional reconnaissance that Hayes had denied. She described the insertion, the movement to the compound, the silence that preceded the ambush, and the nature of the attack when it came, the prepared positions, the coordinated fire, the evidence of a trap that had been set and waited for them with patience. She described James Tran going down. She described the radio call from Hayes ordering them forward. And she described her decision. I looked at my medic on the ground, she said. I looked at the direction the order was sending us. I looked at the fire coming from 3 prepared positions that were not in any intelligence assessment I had been provided. And I made the determination that advancing was not a tactical risk. It was a guaranteed loss of personnel. She paused. I am not in the habit of sending people to die for objectives that can no longer be achieved. That is not what I was trained to do. It is not what this uniform is for. Silence. Then Brennan, the one-star, leaned forward. Commander, you acknowledged in your own account that you were aware your decision constituted a refusal of a direct order. Yes, sir. And you made that decision anyway. Yes, sir. Walk me through the moment. Specifically, what were you thinking? Maya looked at him. I was thinking about Corporal Tran's daughter, she said. Her name is Emma. She's 7 years old. And I was thinking about what it would mean if I followed that order and he didn't come home to her. And then I was thinking about the 26 other people behind me who also had people waiting for them. She held Brennan's gaze. And I decided that Colonel Hayes' order was going to get them all killed. So I did not follow it. Brennan sat back. I didn't write anything down. He just looked at her with the expression of a man who had been in uniform long enough to know the difference between an officer who had failed and an officer who had made the hardest call available to her and made it correctly. Hayes stood up. General Okafor, with respect, the emotional framing of this account does not change. Sit down, Colonel, Okafor said. Hayes sat. Something changed in the room at that moment. It was not dramatic. It was not a sudden shift that anyone could point to and name precisely. But something in the balance of the space moved the way it does when everyone in a room arrives simultaneously at an understanding that has been building for a while. And the understanding is that one person's account is resonating and another person's is not. Maya saw it. She did not allow herself to feel anything about it yet. She kept her focus on the panel. Then Diana Reyes stood up. She had been sitting to Maya's left, and she had been quiet through the entire proceeding. And when she stood up, there was a quality of intention in her movement that made the room pay attention. General Okafor Reyes said, "I would like to submit additional evidence relevant to this inquiry." Hayes's head turned. "What evidence?" he said. He had not meant to say it out loud. It came out before he could stop it, and the fact that it came out the reflexive, uncontrolled question from a man who had spent the entire morning projecting total control was itself a piece of information. Reyes placed a folder on the table in front of General Okafor. "This is an intelligence assessment dated 22 days before Operation Silent Horizon," she said. "It was compiled by the Defense Intelligence Agency Regional Analysis Cell and transmitted to Colonel Hayes on the date indicated. The document identifies the compound designated as the primary target as a potential deception site based on independent source reporting and recommends additional reconnaissance and source verification prior to any direct action authorization." She let that land. "Colonel Hayes received this document," she continued. "He did not share it with mission planning personnel. He did not share it with Commander Carter. He did not include it in the intelligence package briefed to the assault team." The room did not make a sound. Okafor picked up the folder. He opened it. He read. He read slowly, carefully. The way a person reads something when they want to make sure they are understanding every word before they respond to it. Brennan leaned over and read alongside him. Yates did the same. Hayes was very still. Maya did not look at him. She was watching General Okafor's face, reading it the way she had learned to read terrain, looking for the details that told you what was actually there beneath the surface. What she saw in Okafor's face as he read was not anger. It was something colder and more deliberate than anger. It was the expression of a man who had given a long career to an institution he believed in, and who was looking at evidence that someone had used that institution as a personal vehicle, and who was now doing the arithmetic of what that meant and what had to happen next. Okafor set the folder down. He looked at Hayes. "Colonel," he said, "this document has your receipt confirmation on page 3, your name and your access code." This was opened and read. He kept his voice completely neutral. "Can you explain why this assessment was not included in the intelligence package for Operation Silent Horizon?" Hayes was quiet for 4 full seconds. 4 seconds is a long time when everyone in a room is waiting. "The assessment was evaluated as low-confidence speculation," Hayes said finally. "The sources cited were not Tier 1 verified. In my professional judgment, including it in the mission brief would have introduced unnecessary uncertainty into the operational planning. You made that determination alone. It was within my authority to do so. And you did not consult the commanding general, did not flag it for review, did not inform the mission commander. It was within my mom." "I heard you the first time, Colonel." Okafor's voice had not risen. It had done something more effective. It had become very, very precise. "You are telling me that you received an intelligence document flagging your primary target as a possible enemy, deception, and you decided alone without consultation, without disclosure to anyone else in the command structure, that it was not worth mentioning to the people you were sending into that location." Hayes said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The truth was in the room now. It was not speculative, and it was not emotional, and it was not framed. It was in a folder with a receipt confirmation and a date and his access code, and it said exactly what it said, and there was no version of the story that made it mean something else. Maya heard someone exhale behind her. She thought it might have been Brooks, but she wasn't certain. She kept her eyes forward. Hayes straightened in his chair. When he spoke again, his voice had undergone a subtle transformation. The confidence was still there in its structure, in its shape, but something inside it had become hollow. Like a building whose walls are still standing, but whose foundation has given way. "General Okafor," he said, "I want to be clear about something. Whatever questions this document raises about my pre-mission decisions, the fact remains that Commander Carter refused a direct order in a combat environment. That is a matter of record. The two issues are separate." "They are not separate," Okafor said. They are the same issue. If the intelligence you withheld had been properly disclosed, the mission parameters would have been different. The order you gave would have been different. The situation Commander Carter was responding to might not have existed in the form it did. He paused. You cannot separate the order from the conditions that created the necessity for the decision to refuse it. Hayes opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. And then something happened that Maya would remember for the rest of her life. Not because it was loud or dramatic or visually remarkable, but because it was something she had never seen before in 22 years of watching people under pressure. Richard Hayes had no more words. The man who had spent 23 years constructing himself out of words and performance and careful strategic presentations simply ran out. He sat in his chair in his perfect uniform, and he had nothing left to put in front of him. The panel called a recess at 10:47. During the recess, Maya sat in the hallway outside the inquiry room. Brooks came and sat beside her without asking. They didn't talk. There wasn't much to say. The document had done what the document needed to do. Now they waited to see what the institution did with it. Webb appeared from around the corner with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Maya without ceremony. "You okay?" he said. "I'm okay," she said. "Tran's asking for updates," Webb said. "His wife texted me. Tell her it's going the right direction." Webb nodded. He went back to the others. Brooks said quietly, "You knew about the document before the inquiry started." "I had it yesterday afternoon." "You sat on it overnight, Sean." "I made sure it went through proper channels," she said. "The Inspector General's office, not leaked, not handed to someone informally, through the right process." Brooks was quiet. "Most people in your position would have used it immediately, would have made sure Hayes knew you had it before he filed his report. Made him sweat." "I didn't want him to sweat," Maya said. "I wanted the truth to be on record." Brooks looked at her with the expression he got sometimes when she said something that reminded him of exactly why he had placed his trust in her. "Yeah," he said, "that's why." The recess lasted 31 minutes. When the panel reconvened, General Okafor did not waste time. "Colonel Hayes," he said, "this panel is formally referring the intelligence disclosure question to the Inspector General's office for full review. That process will proceed separately from and in addition to this inquiry." He let that register. "With respect to the conduct of Commander Carter, this panel has reviewed the radio transcripts, the mission timeline, the casualty assessments, and the intelligence documents submitted into evidence this morning. We have heard testimony from both parties." He looked at Maya. "Commander Carter, this panel finds that your decision to abort the mission while constituting a technical refusal of a superior officer's order was made in response to a combat situation that had materially deviated from the mission parameters you were briefed on and in the context of intelligence information that had been withheld from you, and that, had it been disclosed, would have warranted significant mission modification or cancellation." He paused. "This panel does not find grounds to sustain charges of insubordination, dereliction of duty, or conduct unbecoming. The charges are dismissed." The room behind Maya erupted. Not loudly. These were special operations personnel. They did not whoop or cheer, but the sound that moved through them, the exhale, the shift, the low murmur of people who have been holding something and have been told they can put it down, was its own kind of sound, and it was unmistakable. Hayes stood up. "General?" "Colonel Hayes, you will sit down and you will remain seated until this panel has concluded its session," Okafor said. His voice had not changed. It did not need to. "You will then report to the Inspector General's office, where you will be interviewed regarding the matters raised by the document submitted this morning. You are not to leave this installation pending the outcome of that review." Hayes stood for one more second. He looked at Okafor. He looked at Brennan. He looked at Yates. And then he looked at Maya. She looked back at him. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel vindicated in the way people expect vindication to feel. She felt something quieter and more serious than that. She felt the weight of what had almost happened. She felt a particular heaviness that comes when you understand how close the edge was and how many people were standing on it. Hayes sat down. Okafor looked at Maya. "Commander Carter, your command authority is reinstated effective immediately. You are dismissed." She stood. She straightened her uniform. She turned and walked toward the door. And Hayes from behind her said something. He said it quietly, not for the room, not performing, but she heard it. She would always wonder later whether he meant for her to. You should have just followed the order, he said. She stopped. She turned and looked at him across the room. I was still sitting in his chair. The perfect uniform, the hollow confidence, the 23 years of constructed self that had just come apart in a single morning. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, if I had James Tran would be dead, and Emma Tran would be 7 years old and growing up without her father. She held his gaze. That's why I didn't follow the order. She walked out. Brooks fell into step beside her immediately. Then Webb, then Holt, then the rest of them, one by one filling the hallway behind her, the sound of 34 sets of boots on the floor. Something she felt in her chest more than she heard it. Outside the building in the morning air, the team gathered around her. Nobody made a speech. Nobody said anything formal or ceremonial. Holt looked at her and said, fishing trip's still on. I'm going to catch something ridiculous and tell my son his commanding officer made it possible. Several of the operators laughed, the real kind of laugh, the involuntary kind, the kind that comes when the pressure finally releases and the body needs somewhere to put it. Maya looked at all of them. She looked at their faces tired, marked by the past 48 hours, carrying everything that had happened, and she felt something that she did not have a word for in any of the languages available to her. Something that was not gratitude exactly, and not pride exactly, and not love exactly, but was in the neighborhood of all three. Get some rest, she said. Yes, ma'am, several of them said simultaneously, and someone go tell Tran it's over. Webb was already on his phone. Maya walked away from the building. She walked without a specific destination at first, just moving, letting her legs carry her somewhere that wasn't the room she had just left. She ended up at the edge of the parade ground. She stood there in the morning sun, and she thought about the past 72 hours, and she thought about the document and the inquiry and Hayes's face when he ran out of words, and she thought about Okafor's voice saying the charges were dismissed. She thought about all of it, and then she thought about something else. She thought about the fact that 34 men had put on their dress uniforms this morning without being asked, had shown up without ceremony or instruction, had simply been there because that is what you do when someone you trust is standing in a room trying to defend the right thing. She had spent years wondering in the quiet, honest moments that leadership creates when you are alone with your own reflection, whether she was actually the kind of officer she was trying to be, whether the decisions she made, the standards she held, the choices she made when no one was watching or when the cost was high, whether any of it was real or whether she was just performing a version of integrity for an audience. This morning had answered that question. Not because the panel had cleared her, not because Hayes had been exposed, but because 34 people who had seen her at her best and her worst, who had watched her fail and recover, who had been with her when the stakes were as high as they get. 34 people had shown up in their dress uniforms at 08:30 in the morning and stood outside a door. You cannot manufacture that. You cannot build it with rank or with reputation or with careful strategic presentation. You can only earn it. The way you earn it is by being exactly who you are when being exactly who you are costs you something. She stood there in the morning sun for a few more minutes. Then she went to see James Tran. He was awake and slightly better than the day before. His color was coming back. Emma had sent a drawing through his wife, a picture of a helicopter with a stick figure woman in it that had Commoner Maya written in 7-year-old handwriting above the door. Tran showed it to her. She looked at it for a long time. She spelled it wrong, Tran said. She spelled it perfectly, Maya said. He smiled. The real kind, the kind that reaches the eyes. She stayed for 20 minutes. She did not tell him everything that had happened in the inquiry room. She would tell him the full version later, when he was stronger. For now, she told him the only part that mattered. It's over, she said. You focus on getting home. Already am, he said. She walked back toward the main building. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from General Okafor's aide, short, direct, the way military communications tend to be. The general would like to meet with Commander Carter at 1400. She looked at the message. She wrote back, confirmed. She put the phone in her pocket. She did not know yet what Admiral Walker was going to say to her when she sat down in that office. She did not know what the Inspector General's review of Hayes was going to uncover, or how far up the chain the questions would go, or what the next chapter of her career was going to look like. She knew that it had survived. She knew that her team had survived. She knew that the truth had survived. And she knew something else, something she had always believed but had now seen proven in a way that went past belief into something harder and more permanent. She knew that the kind of leadership that matters is not the kind that looks good in a briefing. It is the kind that stands between its people and everything that would hurt them. Even when standing there costs you everything. Even when the cost is your rank, your reputation, your future, your career. Every plan you had made for yourself since you were 18 years old and walking into the Naval Academy, knowing exactly who you wanted to become. Even then, especially then. That was what 34 badges on a table looking like. That was what a 7-year-old girl drawing a helicopter with Commander Maya on the door looked like. That was what leadership looked like. Not in the briefing, not in the report. In the morning outside the door when you show up because someone you trust is on the other side of it. Maya Carter walked back toward the building. She had a meeting with a general at 1400. She had a team that needed rest. She had a medic who needed to go home to his daughter. And she had work to do. General Okafor's office was on the 4th floor of the JSOC headquarters building, and Maya had been in it exactly once before 2 years ago for a routine command review that had lasted 20 minutes and ended with a handshake and nothing memorable said by either party. This was not going to be that kind of meeting. She arrived at 13:58, 2 minutes early, the way she always arrived everywhere because punctuality was one of those small disciplines that cost nothing and said everything about how seriously you took the moment you were walking into. The aide outside the door, a young captain named Flores, who looked like he had been awake since well before sunrise and was managing it with coffee and willpower, told her the general would be with her in a few minutes and offered her water, which she accepted. She sat in the chair outside the office and held the water and thought about what Okafor might want to discuss, and she ran through the possibilities the way she ran through mission scenarios, not to predict the outcome, but to make sure she was not surprised by any direction the conversation went. The door opened at 1403 seconds. Okafor himself opened it, not Flores. The general opened his own door, which told her something she filed carefully away. "Commander Carter," he said, "come in." His office was the kind of office that reflected the man in it, not decorated for impression, but organized for function, everything in its place, nothing on the walls that wasn't earned, the kind of space that said, this person has been doing serious work for a long time and does not need the room to announce it. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and sat down himself and looked at her with the sin she had noticed in the inquiry room, the kind that meant he was not performing listening. He was actually doing it. "How are you?" he asked. The question surprised her slightly. Not because it was inappropriate, but because it was direct in a way she hadn't expected from a 2-star general opening a meeting. "I'm standing, sir," she said. "That's more than I expected 48 hours ago." He nodded. He picked up a pen and turned it over in his fingers. Not writing with it, just holding it the way some people hold things when they're thinking. "I want to tell you something before we get into the formal part of this conversation," he said. "I've been in this uniform for 31 years. I have sat on a lot of inquiry panels. I have watched a lot of officers present their cases, defend their decisions, try to position themselves in the most favorable light available to them." He paused. "What I watched you do this morning was different." She waited. "You didn't position yourself," he said. "You just told the truth, in the exact same tone you'd use to give a weather briefing. No drama, no appeal to emotion, no strategic framing." He set the pen down. "That is harder than it sounds. Most people, even good people, even honest people, when their career is on the line, they find ways to shade things, to present the truth in the arrangement that serves them best." He looked at her steadily. "You didn't do that." "The truth was already serving me, sir," she said. "The document made sure of that." "The document helped," Okafor said. "But you didn't know about the document when you made the decision. You made the decision based on what you believed was right. The document just confirmed it." He leaned back slightly. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, not the way you think I want you to answer it." "Yes, sir." "When you refused Hayes's order, when you pressed that radio button and said you were aborting, were you thinking about your career?" She considered the question for exactly as long as it deserved. "For about 1 second," she said, "and then I looked at Tron on the ground and I stopped thinking about it." Okafor was quiet. Then he said, "That's the right answer." He opened a folder on his desk. She recognized the format. It was an official record summary, the kind that preceded personnel decisions. The Inspector General's office has been working since yesterday afternoon, he said. What they've found so far is consistent with what your legal team submitted. Hayes received the intelligence assessment. He read it. He made the determination not to disclose it. He closed the folder. What we are finding additionally, and this is not public information yet, is that this was not the first time. Maya looked at him. There were 2 prior operations over the past 14 months, Okafor said. In both cases, intelligence assessments that raised concerns about mission parameters were not included in the briefing packages. In both cases, the missions proceeded. In one case, the mission succeeded and nobody looked too closely at the process. In the other case, the mission had problems that were attributed to enemy adaptability rather than intelligence failure. He let that sit. He's done this before, Maya said. We believe so. And people could have been hurt. People could have been killed. Yes, she sat with that. The weight of it was different from the weight of her own situation. This was bigger and older, and it had been going on before she ever had her first conversation with Hayes, before she ever sat in his briefing room and raised her hand and said, something looks wrong with this intelligence. I was willing to do it over and over, she said, not because he was reckless, because he had done it once and it worked and he learned that he could. Okafor nodded. That is the assessment, yes. How many operations is he connected to over the past 3 years? That is what the Inspector General is now determining. She exhaled slowly. Sir, when does this become public? That depends on several factors. The IG process has its own timeline. There are congressional notifications required at certain thresholds. The JAG office is involved, he paused. It will become public. I can tell you that with certainty. The question is sequence and timing. And Hayes? Colonel Hayes has been formally suspended from all command and operational planning responsibilities, effective as of 1100 this morning, Okafor said. He is cooperating with the investigation. Whether that cooperation reflects genuine accountability or strategic self-preservation, I'll leave for the IG to determine. Maya nodded. She thought about Hayes sitting in the inquiry room with nothing left to say. She thought about the version of him she had first encountered, the polished, controlled, strategically precise man who had spent 2 decades building something that looked like a career and was actually a costume. She thought about what it must take to maintain that for that long. The constant calculation, the permanent management of other people's perceptions, the exhausting work of never being simply honestly who you are. She did not feel sorry for him, but she understood in the way that understanding sometimes comes when you least want it, how a person becomes what Hayes had become. One small compromise at a time, one intelligence report set aside, one warning not forwarded, each individual decision small enough to rationalize until the rationalizations pile up into something that cannot be called anything other than what it is. Commander Carter, Okafor said, pulling her back. Sir, there is something else I need to discuss with you. He opened a different folder. Prior to this inquiry, 2 members of the Senate Armed Services Committee received communications from Hayes' office suggesting that the events of Operation Silent Horizon represented a command failure that raised questions about the judgment of officers within Black Squadron's leadership structure. He looked at her directly. Those communications were designed to create a political dimension to this situation that would be more difficult to unwind than a standard inquiry. She went very still. He tried to bring Congress into this. He made contacts. Whether those contacts will pursue the matter is unclear. What is clear is that the intent was to create enough noise at the political level that even a favorable inquiry outcome would leave a shadow over your record. He paused. That is a level of premeditation that goes beyond self-protection, Commander. That is calculated retaliation. The room was very quiet. Maya processed what she was hearing. She processed it carefully the way she processed everything that had high stakes attached to it. Not quickly, not emotionally, but thoroughly turning it over and looking at each face of it. Hayes had not just tried to cover himself. He had tried to make sure that even if he lost the inquiry, she would carry the damage permanently. That even with her charges dismissed, there would be enough political murmur, enough carefully planted doubt that her record would carry a stain she could never fully remove. He had planned for losing, and he had arranged consequences for her that would survive his loss. "What happens to the Senate contacts?" she said. "My office is reaching out through the appropriate channels to provide the full factual record of this situation, including the intelligence document and the IG findings to date. The intent is to ensure that any member of Congress who received Hayes's communication also receives the complete context." He paused. "But I want you to understand something. Even with that, there will be people who have heard what Hayes said and will not fully hear the correction. That is the nature of this kind of action. The initial impression leaves a mark." She nodded slowly. "I understand. How are you with that?" She thought about it honestly. "I would rather have 34 people O'Farrell and my name carry a shadow than have a clean record and bring a body home," she said. Oker looked at her for a long moment. "That," he said, "is exactly the right answer." Again, he closed both folders. "I want to tell you what I see when I look at your record," he said, "and I want you to hear it, not dismiss it, which I suspect will be your instinct." He leaned forward slightly. "You are one of the most naturally effective combat commanders in this command. Not because of your physical abilities, though those are not in question, but because of the way your people respond to you. That is not something you can teach. It is not something that shows up in an evaluation form. It shows up in the way 34 operators came to work this morning in their dress uniforms without being ordered to." She looked at the desk. "Look at me, Commander." She looked at him. "That matters," he said. "It matters more than most things we measure in this business. And I want to make sure it is not lost in the noise of what Hayes tried to do." "Sir," she said carefully, "what is it you're telling me?" "I'm telling you that your career is intact," he said. "I'm telling you that what you did both on the mission and in this inquiry reflects exactly the kind of judgment this command needs at leadership levels." He paused. "And I'm telling you that there are going to be conversations in the coming weeks about what the right next step for your service looks like. I want you to be prepared for that." She held very still. "What kind of conversations?" she said. "The kind that happen when an institution realizes it needs to take stock of what it actually values versus what it says it values." He looked at her evenly. "You exposed a gap, Commander Carter, not intentionally, not for political purposes, not as a strategy, but you exposed it. And now some people are going to have to look at that gap and decide what to do about it." She nodded. She understood what he was saying without him saying all of it. She had spent enough time inside institutions to know how they worked, how change moved through them slowly in response to the moments that made the need for it impossible to ignore. She had become, without choosing, to one of those moments. "I have one more question for you," Okafor said. "Sir, if you had known before the mission, before the order, before any of it, that refusing Hayes would lead to this inquiry, this investigation, all of it, the Senate contacts, everything. If you had known all of that was coming," he held her gaze, "would you have made the same call?" She answered without hesitating. "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because the alternative was Tran dying," she said. "And Webb, and Holt 3 months from retirement, and all the others. And I could not live in a world where I had the opportunity to prevent that and chose my career instead." She paused. "There's no version of that I could live with. So there was really only one option." Okafor nodded very slowly. "Dismissed, Commander," he said. "Get some rest. You've earned it." She stood, straightened her uniform, and walked to the door. She had her hand on the handle when he spoke again. "Carter," she turned. "What that team did this morning," he said, "in their dress uniforms, standing outside that door." He shook his head slightly, and for just a moment the general looked like something closer to a human being than a rank. "I've been doing this for 31 years. I've never seen anything quite like that." She held his gaze. "They're good people, sir," she said. She walked out. The hallway outside was empty. Flores had stepped away from his desk. The building had the afternoon quiet that settles into working spaces when the dramatic part of the day has passed and people have gone back to the 1,000 ordinary tasks that fill the hours between crises. Maya walked down the hall, and she did not rush and she did not slow down. She moved at the same pace she always moved, at the pace of a person who knows where she is going and why, and she let herself feel, just for these few minutes of empty hallway, what the past 72 hours had actually been. She let herself feel the exhaustion, The real kind, not the physical kind, the kind that comes from carrying the weight of other people's lives in your hands and not dropping it. She let herself feel the thing that had been sitting in her chest since the moment the panel cleared her. Not triumph, not relief exactly, but something more complicated than either something that was tangled up with the image of Hayes's face when he had nothing left to say, and with the sound of 34 boots in the hallway, and with Emma Tran's drawing of a helicopter, with Come Maynor Maya written above the door. She let herself feel all of it for the length of that hallway. And then she walked outside and the air hit her and she put it away. The way she put things away carefully in the place where things go, when you have felt them properly and do not need to carry them in front of you anymore. Brooks was leaning against the wall outside. He was drinking coffee from a paper cup and looking at nothing in particular, which was the Nathan Brooks version of waiting for someone. He looked up when she came out. Well, he said. Career's intact, she said. Hayes is under IG investigation. He made contacts on the Hill before the inquiry tried to create political blowback. Brooks absorbed this. Of course he did. Okafor is managing it. And she looked at him. And he said there are going to be conversations about what the right next step looks like. Brooks was quiet for a moment. What does that mean? I think it means they're looking at the gap between what they say they value and what they actually do, she said, and figuring out what to do about it. With you. Near me, at least. Brooks finished his coffee. He crumpled the cup. He looked at her with the expression he used when he was being completely honest and not constructing anything for the listener's benefit. You okay with that, he said. Whatever comes next. The conversations, the attention, all of it. I wasn't trying to become a case study, she said. I know, but you did. Yeah. She looked past him for a moment. I'm okay with it. If something comes out of it that makes the next team safer, that makes the next commander less likely to sit in a briefing with incomplete intelligence and not know it, then I'm okay with it. Brooks nodded. What about you, she said. He looked at her. 22 years, she said. You've watched this institution from the inside for a long time. Does it actually change when something like this happens? Does it actually get better? He thought about it for longer than she expected. Brooks was not a man who answered questions carelessly. Sometimes, he said finally, not always, not automatically. It depends on whether the right people stay and the wrong people go. He paused. This time I think the right people stayed. She looked at him. He shrugged the way he did when he'd said something that meant more than he was comfortable performing. Come on, he said. The team is at the mess. They're waiting. She fell into step beside him. The mess hall was not full, but the section where Black Squadron had gathered had the particular quality of a space that has been through something together and is now sitting with it. Not celebrating, not processing dramatically, just being present with each other the way people are when they have been through the kind of thing that you cannot fully translate to someone who was not there. When Maya walked in, the room did not go quiet and look at her. That would have been a different kind of unit. These people looked up, registered her presence, and went back to what they were doing, which was eating and talking, and occasionally saying something that made someone nearby laugh. The real kind of laugh, the kind you can't manufacture. Holt waved her over from across the room. She went. I was sitting with Webb and two other operators, Sergeant Carlos Reyes and Petty Officer First Class Anthony Kim, who was the youngest member of Black Squadron at 26, and who still had the quality of contained intensity that very young operators have before the year's round, some of the edges. General let you off easy, Holt said. He was professional, she said. That mean yes or no? It means professional. She sat down. How are we doing? Kim ate 4 plates of food, Webb said. I think he's stress eating. I'm not stress eating, Kim said. I just didn't eat for 40 hours. That's stress not eating, Webb said, which is the same thing in reverse. Maya looked at Kim. You doing okay? He looked at her directly the way young operators do when they're deciding whether to say the real thing or the version that sounds okay. He decided on the real thing. I kept thinking about it, he said. Out there, when everything went wrong, I kept thinking, what do I do if Carter doesn't make the call? What do I do if the order comes and she follows it and we keep moving? He shook his head slightly. I didn't have a good answer to that. And the fact that you made the call before I had to figure out my own answer, I've been sitting with that. The table was quiet. You would have figured it out, Maya said. Maybe, he said, but I didn't have to, because you already knew. She looked at him for a moment. Kimon, she said, "Ma'am, eat your fourth plate." He almost smiled. "Already on it." The afternoon moved away. Afternoons move. After the kind of morning this had been slowly with a particular quality of suspension, as if the day were giving everyone in it space to settle into the new reality of what had happened and what it meant. At 1600, Maya got a message from Diana Reyes. The IG office has formally expanded the investigation to cover Hayes' prior 3 operational planning assignments. They were looking at 14 months of records. This is going to be significant. She read it twice. Then she sent back, "Keep me informed." She put her phone in her pocket and went to find Brooks. He was in the equipment room running his gear through a post-mission check with the methodical focus he brought to everything, moving through each item. The way someone does when they've been doing it long enough that the physical routine is also a mental reset. She told him about the IG expansion. He kept moving through his check without stopping. 14 months, at least. "So this goes back to before you were assigned here." "Before either of us," she said. He set down a piece of equipment carefully. He looked at her. "Carter, if they find what they're looking for in those 14 months, people are going to ask why it wasn't caught earlier, why no one raised a flag, why the system didn't work the way it was supposed to." "I know. And some of those questions are going to be uncomfortable." "Some of them should be," she said. "If the system failed to catch this for 14 months, that's worth being uncomfortable about." Brooks picked up his gear again. "You know what the difference between a good institution and a bad one is?" She waited. "A good institution is uncomfortable when it's wrong," he said. "A bad one finds ways to stay comfortable." He went back to his check. "This is going to be uncomfortable. That means something." She thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. At 1800, she went back to see Tron. He was significantly better. He was sitting up and had eaten a real meal and had his phone, and when Maya walked in, he was reading something on it that he quickly put face down on the blanket, with the expression of someone who has been caught doing something he would rather not explain. "What are you reading?" she said. "Nothing." "Nathan, it's fine. What is it?" He picked it up and showed her. It was a message thread, a long one. She looked at the preview and recognized names, operators from other SEAL teams, from other units, people she knew only by reputation or by brief encounters at joint training exercises. They were talking about what had happened, about the inquiry, about Hayes, about Black Squadron, about Maya. "How many people?" she said. "It's pretty wide," Tran said carefully. "How wide?" He looked at her with the expression of a man who is deciding how much of a thing to say. "The story is out there, Carter. Not officially, but the community talks. People know what happened. People know what the team did." She handed his phone back. "Are they saying anything that's going to cause problems?" she said. "No," he said. "They're saying things like, if it had been my team, I hope I would have done what you did. They're saying things like, I've served with commanders who would have followed that order, and they're sitting with that." He looked at her. "You made people think about themselves, about the kind of officer they are, or the kind they want to be. That's not a small thing." She sat with that. It was not a small thing. But it was also not something she had intended or sought. It was a consequence of a private decision made in a dark field with gunfire going off around her. The fact that it had become something larger than that moment was something she was still learning how to hold. "Get some sleep," she told him. "You too," he said. "I will." He gave her the same look Brooks had given her the previous night. "I mean it this time," she said. She left the medical facility and walked back toward the barracks. The base was quiet in the way bases get in the early evening, the institutional hum of the day winding toward the institutional quiet of the night. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost let it go. Then she answered. "Commander Carter." A woman's voice. Professional. Deliberate. "My name is Catherine Marsh. I'm a senior investigator with the Senate Armed Services Committee. I apologize for the direct contact. I got your number through official JSOC channels with General Okafor's office." Maya stopped walking. "What can I do for you, Ms. Marsh?" she said. "I've been reviewing the communications we received from Colonel Hayes' office prior to the inquiry," Marsh said, "and I've subsequently reviewed the materials provided by General Okafor's office and the preliminary IG findings." A pause. "I want to be direct with you, Commander. We were given a significantly different picture by Colonel Hayes than what the evidence reflects." "I know," Maya said. I want you to know that the committee is aware of that discrepancy and is taking it seriously. I'm not in a position to tell you what the formal response will look like. That determination is above my level. But I wanted to contact you directly to tell you that the record is being corrected. Another pause. And to say that what I've read about what happened on that mission and what your team did afterward, it reflects the kind of leadership this committee wants to understand better. Maya stood in the evening quiet and processed what a senior Senate investigator had just said to her on the phone. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. "One more thing," Marsh said. "Off the record, Commander. Yes, there are people on this committee who have been asking for years whether the standards being applied inside Special Operations Command actually match the values the institution says it holds. Your situation has created an opening for a conversation that has been needed for a long time." A pause. "Some people are going to want to have that conversation with you directly. I want you to be prepared for that." It was the second time in one day that someone had told her to be prepared for conversations that were coming. She was beginning to understand that the 72 hours she had just lived through were not a crisis with a resolution. They were a beginning. "I understand," she said. "Good," Marsh said. "Take care of yourself, Commander." The call ended. Maya stood in the quiet and looked at the sky above the base, which had gone the particular deep blue of late evening, and she thought about the shape of what was coming. Not the next week, not the inquiry aftermath, or the IG process, or the Senate conversations. Those were all real and all coming, and she would deal with each of them as they arrived. She thought about something longer than that. She thought about the young operators like Kim who were watching what happened when you made the right call at a high cost. She thought about the junior officers across the command who were going to have to make calls of their own someday in the dark with insufficient information and a superior officer on the radio and a team behind them. She thought about what they were going to carry into those moments. And she thought about the fact that what they carried was shaped not entirely, but meaningfully by what they had seen the people ahead of them do. She was part of that now, not because she had chosen it, but because of what she had chosen when she pressed a radio button in the middle of a firefight and said, "We are coming home." She put her phone in her pocket. She walked back toward the barracks. She had a meeting with General Okafor in the morning about next steps. She had a call with the JAG office about the Hayes investigation. She had a team that needed leadership and a medic who needed to get home to his daughter and a young operator who needed to know that the institution he had given himself to was worth the giving. She had work to do. She always had work to do. That was the thing about leadership that people who hadn't done it didn't always understand. It wasn't a moment. It wasn't a decision or a mission or an inquiry or even a crisis. It was a practice. A daily, ongoing, never-finished practice of showing up as the person your people needed you to be, especially when being that person cost you something. She had paid a cost this week that she had not been sure she would survive professionally. She had survived. And tomorrow she was going to get up and pay it again. Not because anyone was watching, because her team was worth it, because Emma Tran was 7 years old and her father was coming home, because 34 people had put on their dress uniforms without being asked, because somewhere in the chain of every institution that had ever meant anything, there was a person who had made the decision to be honest, when dishonesty was cheaper to protect, when abandonment was easier to stay, when leaving was the rational choice. And that person was worth being. Maya Carter went inside. She set her phone on the nightstand. She laid down on her bunk, and for the first time in 72 hours, she closed her eyes and slept. She slept for 9 hours without moving. That almost never happened. Maya Carter was someone who slept the way she did everything else, with one part of her brain still running, still monitoring, still available to the next thing that needed her. She had learned to function on 4 or 5 hours and call it sufficient. She had built her life around the assumption that rest was something you fitted in around the edges of the things that actually mattered. But that night, her body made the decision for her. It simply stopped. And when she opened her eyes the next morning and looked at the time on her phone and saw what it said, she lay there for a moment in the particular quiet of having slept deeply and genuinely, and she felt something that took her a moment to identify. She felt like herself. Not the version of herself that had been running on controlled adrenaline and professional discipline for 72 hours. The actual version, the one that existed underneath the uniform and the rank and the weight of the past 3 days. Her phone had 17 messages. She looked at them in order. 3 were from Diana Reyes. The IG investigation had formally expanded overnight. The scope now covered Hayes' entire tenure at JSOC going back 26 months. The number of operations under review had grown from the initial 14 months Okafor had mentioned to a broader window that included 11 separate planning cycles. One message was from General Okafor's aide Flores. The morning meeting was confirmed for 0900. 4 messages were from people she knew, officers from other commands, a former instructor from her training days, 2 operators she had served with years ago in different units. Each message was short. Each said a version of the same thing. They had heard what happened. They wanted her to know they were glad it came out the way it did. She read those 4 carefully. She read them the way you read something when you are not sure yet what it means for you, but you know it means something. One message was from Nathan Brooks, sent at 0600. It said, "Coffee when you're ready." She got up, showered, dressed, and went to find him. He was where she expected, in the small common area off the main corridor, with 2 cups already waiting, sitting in the chair closest to the door, the way he always sat with his back to the wall and his sight line to the entrance. 22 years of habit. She sat down and picked up the cup. They didn't talk for the first 2 minutes. That was also habit. Brooks had always understood that the first conversation of the day sometimes needed a moment before it became a conversation. Then he said, "The team wants to do something." She looked at him over her cup. What kind of something? Webb's idea originally, but everyone agreed. He held his cup with both hands. They want to formally mark what happened. Not publicly, not for anyone outside the unit. Just something among themselves that acknowledges what this week was. She set her cup down carefully. What are they thinking? They want you to return the badges personally, he said. Not at a ceremony, not in a formal setting. Just you, the team, a room, no cameras, no press, no senior officers present. He paused. They said it was your call, whether you were comfortable with it. She looked at the table. She thought about the image she had carried since the inquiry, 34 badges on a table. The sound of them being set down one by one. The expression on Hayes' face when he looked at them and understood that he was not just facing one officer. He was facing an entire brotherhood that had made a collective decision about what mattered. She thought about what it would mean to pick each of those badges back up and give them back with her own hands. Yes, she said. Tell them yes. Brooks nodded. He picked up his coffee. 0800 before your meeting with Okafor, training room 2. She looked at him. You already knew I'd say yes. I knew you'd say yes, he said. I just wasn't going to arrange it without asking. She almost smiled. Nathan. Yeah. Thank you for all of it, for the whole week. He looked at her with the directness that was his particular signature, the thing that had made her trust him from the first week she arrived at Black Squadron. You've got nothing to thank me for, he said. You kept us alive. Everything else was just returning the favor. Training room 2 was a functional space utilitarian, no pretense, the kind of room that had hosted 1,000 operational briefings and would host 1,000 more. The team was already there when Maya arrived at 0758. They were in uniform, not dressed this time, but working uniform, the everyday clothes and they had arranged themselves around the edges of the room in the loose way that operators arrange themselves when there is no formation being called. But everyone understands this is a moment that deserves presence. The 34 badges were on the table in the center of the room. Maya walked to the table. She looked at them. They were arranged in no particular order. There was nothing ceremonial about how they were placed. They were just there in a pile that was somehow both random and deliberate, the way things look when they have been placed by many different hands with a single shared intention. She picked up the first one. She looked at the name on it. She walked to the person it belonged to and held it out to them. Petty Officer Anthony Kim. Hay was the youngest. He stood straight and took the badge from her hand, and she held on for just a moment before she let go. And he looked at her with the specific expression of a 26-year-old who has been through something that has changed the shape of what he believes about the institution he serves and about the people in it. Thank you, ma'am, he said quietly. Thank you, Kim, she said, for showing up. She went back to the table. She picked up another badge, Holt. She found him against the far wall with his arms at his sides, and his face carrying the composed stillness that she had seen him carry in the dark outside the compound. The calmness that was not the absence of feeling, but the presence of something stronger than feeling. She held out his badge. 3 months, she said. He took it. 3 months, he agreed. That fishing trip happens, she said. That's not a request. Already booked the cabin, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Good. She went badge by badge through the room. It took time. She did not rush it. Each person got a moment, not a speech, not a formal gesture, but a look, a word, something that was specific to them and only to them because she knew them specifically and only as themselves, not as a unit or a team or an abstraction, but as the individual people who had made individual decisions to stand behind her in a hallway at 0830 in their dress uniforms. Webb got, I still want to know how you got that document. He grinned. Still can't tell you. Marcus? Carter, I know, she said. I know. She pressed the badge into his hand and held it there for a beat. Thank you. His grin faded into something more serious and more honest. Any time, he said. When she reached Brooks, she was down to the last badge. She stood in front of him and she looked at him and she held the badge in her hand and she thought about 22 years of service and the particular quality of a person who had built himself into someone the institution could rely on not for career reasons, but because that was simply who he was. She held out the badge. He took it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he said, you know what this week was, right? Tell me. It was the test, he said, not the mission, not the inquiry. This week, the whole thing was the test of whether you are who you've been telling yourself you are for your whole career. He held her gaze. And you passed. She looked at him. We all passed, she said. He nodded. Yeah, we did. The room held that for a moment. Then someone she thought it was Ray as the young sergeant from the back row started to applaud. Not the formal rhythmic applause of a ceremony, but the real kind, irregular and genuine. And it spread through the room in 3 seconds and filled the space for a moment that was brief and unscripted and completely true. Maya stood at the front of the room and let it happen. She did not feel like a hero. She had decided a long time ago that feeling like a hero was a signal that you were looking at yourself from the outside, that you had started to perform your own story rather than live it. She did not feel vindicated in the theatrical sense. She did not feel like she had won. She felt like herself in a room full of people she trusted with her life on the other side of something that had tried to take everything from her and had failed. That was enough. That was more than enough. At 0855, she left the room and walked to General Okafor's office. At 0900 exactly, she sat down across from him for the second time in 2 days. He looked at her differently this morning, not dramatically differently, but with a quality of settled attention that was distinct from the careful evaluation of the previous meeting, as if the evaluation had concluded and something had been decided. How are you this morning? He said. Better than yesterday, she said. Better than I expected to be. He nodded. He opened a folder. He turned it to face her and slid it across the desk. She looked at it. It was a formal recommendation. She read it once quickly and then read it again more slowly. It was a recommendation for her promotion to captain signed by Okafor and co-signed by 2 other general officers she recognized. She looked up. Sir, she said. Before you say anything, he said. I want to explain the thinking, not because I need to justify it, but because I believe you deserve to understand it rather than just receive it. He leaned forward slightly. This recommendation is not a reward for refusing an order. Refusing orders is not something this institution rewards and should not be. It is a recognition of command judgment exercised correctly in a complex situation under pressure at a personal cost with full awareness of the consequences. He held her gaze. Those are the things we say we value. This is what it looks like when we act like we mean it. She looked at the folder. She thought about the 18-year-old version of herself walking into the Naval Academy. Not because anyone told her to, not because she had a plan for what rank she would reach by what age, but because she could not imagine being anything other than someone who showed up when it mattered. She thought about every decision in the years between then and now. Every difficult call, every moment of choosing what was right over what was easy. Every time she had stood between her people and whatever was trying to get to them. She had not done any of it for this. She had done it because she could not have lived with herself if she hadn't, and somehow that was the reason it had led here. Sir, she said, I'm honored. You should be, he said simply, because you earned it the hard way, which is the only way it means anything. She signed the acknowledgement form and slid the folder back to him. There's something else, Okafor said. She waited. The IG review expanded again this morning, he said. In the review of Hayes's prior planning assignments, investigators found communications between Hayes and a civilian intelligence contractor. The nature of those communications is still being evaluated, but the preliminary assessment is that Hayes may have been selectively shaping intelligence products before they reached the operational planning level, not just withholding documents, actively influencing the analysis. The room was very still. Maya processed what that meant. If it was true and Okafor would not have said it if the preliminary assessment were not serious, then Hayes was not just someone who had buried an inconvenient document to protect a promotion timeline. He had been intervening in the intelligence process itself, shaping what information reached the people who were making life and death decisions based on it. How many operations could be affected, she said. That's what the investigation is now determining, Okafor said. It could be significant. People could have died, she said, in those other operations, from decisions made on intelligence he shaped. That is a possibility the investigation is taking seriously. She looked at the desk. She thought about what Marcus Webb had said he had done it once, and it worked, and he learned that he could. She had thought that applied to the single intelligence document. She had not imagined the scale of what he might have been doing. What happens to the people who were on those operations, she said, the ones who made calls based on what they were given, the ones who might have made different calls if they'd had accurate intelligence. That's one of the reasons the investigation matters, Okafor said. If there are cases where operational decisions were adversely affected by compromised intelligence, those cases need to be re-examined. Decisions need to be reviewed in the context of what the commanders actually had access to. She nodded slowly. In Hayes. Hayes has legal representation. He is cooperating selectively. Okafor's voice carried a precise dryness on that last word. The process will go where it goes. She looked at the general directly. Do you think he believed he was doing the right thing at any point, or was it always purely self-serving? Okafor considered the question. I think he started by believing that his judgment was superior to the process, he said. That he knew better than the analysts, better than the committee review structure, better than the chain of disclosure requirements. And I think that belief over time became indistinguishable from self-interest, until he genuinely could not tell the difference between what was good for the mission and what was good for Richard Hayes. He paused. That is how this kind of corruption usually works. It rarely starts as cynical calculation. It starts as certainty. Maya sat with that. She thought about how certainty, the good kind, the kind that lets you press a radio button and abort a mission when every institutional instinct is screaming at you to comply, could become the bad kind. The kind that stops listening. The kind that stopped hearing the intelligence assessors and the reconnaissance requests and the raised hands in the briefing room. The difference, she thought, was not in the certainty itself. It was in what the certainty was anchored to. Hayes was certain of himself. She was certain of her people. That distinction was everything. Sir, she said, what happens now to the command, to the unit? What does the next phase look like? Black Squadron returns to operational status in approximately 3 weeks, pending the completion of individual clearance reviews related to the investigation. Okafor said, your command authority is fully intact and operational as of this morning's formalization. He paused. As for the broader command, there are going to be structural reviews of the intelligence integration process and special operations planning. Those reviews are going to result in changes, not cosmetic ones. Because of Silent Horizon. Because of what Silent Horizon exposed, he said. The gap was not new, the exposure was new. She nodded. One last thing, Okafor said. He picked up a single sheet of paper from the corner of his desk. He looked at it for a moment, and something in his expression shifted very slightly, not softening exactly, but something behind his composure becoming briefly visible. This came to my office this morning. It was addressed to me, but it is for you. He held it out. She took it. It was a letter, handwritten on plain paper, the handwriting careful and deliberate in the way of someone who does not write by hand often and is taking the task seriously. She read it. Dear General Okafor, my name is Sandra Tran. My husband James is a corporal in Black Squadron. He came home because of Commander Carter. I don't know the right words for what I want to say. I've been trying to find them since James called me from the hospital. I want to say thank you, but that isn't big enough. I want to say she saved my family, but that still isn't quite right. What I want to say is this: my daughter Emma is 7 years old and she is going to grow up with her father because there was a commander who decided that was worth fighting for. I don't know if that matters to anyone in your building, but it matters more than I can say to us. Please tell Commander Carter that Emma drew her a picture. We will keep the original. But I wanted the commander to know in our house she is already a hero. With gratitude, Sandra Tron. Maya read it once. She read it again. She set it down on the desk because she needed her hands to be doing something other than holding it. She looked at the wall to the left of Okafor's desk for a moment. Just a moment, collecting herself with the efficiency of someone who has learned that emotion is not the enemy, but that you must know where to put it. Then she looked back at Okafor. Thank you for showing me this, she said. I thought you should have it, he said. He slid it across the desk toward her. It's yours. She picked it up and folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her uniform jacket against her chest, where she would feel it for the rest of the day. She stood. She thanked the general. She walked out of his office and down the hallway and outside into the morning, and this time the morning was different, not because anything visible had changed. The base looked the same. The sky was the same. The sounds were the same. But she was carrying Sandra Tran's letter in her chest pocket, and she was carrying a promotion recommendation with Okafor's signature on it, and she was carrying the memory of 34 badges returned by her own hands, and she was carrying the particular knowledge that she had been tested at the deepest level available and had not broken. She walked to the medical facility. James Tran was sitting up fully when she arrived. His color was good. He looked like a man who had decided to get better and was making good on it. His wife Sandra was there. Maya had not expected that. She stopped in the doorway for a moment and looked at the two of them, Tran in the bed, Sandra in the chair beside him with her hand over his, and the particular quality of presence between two people who have come very close to losing each other and are still processing what it means that they didn't. Sandra looked up when Maya appeared. She stood up immediately. Commander Carter, she said. Mrs. Tran, Maya said. I'm sorry to interrupt. Please don't apologize, Sandra said. She crossed the room in 3 steps, and before Maya could say anything else, Sandra Tran put her arms around her. It was brief. It was unscripted. It was the kind of human moment that does not fit neatly into any category of military protocol or professional relationship. Maya held on for exactly as long as it lasted. When Sandra stepped back, her eyes were bright. She did not try to hide it. Emma wants to know if she can write to you, Sandra said. She can write to me, Maya said. Tell her I have the helicopter drawing. Tell her she got the spelling almost right. Sandra laughed. The real kind. She's been practicing since she sent it. Tran was watching this from the bed with the expression of a man who is exactly where he is supposed to be in the world. How are you, Maya asked him. Trying to get out of here in 4 days, he said. The doctor said maybe 5. I said 4. 5, Sandra said without looking away from Maya. 4, Tran said again. Listen to your doctor, Maya said. See, Sandra said, the commander agrees with me. I said listen to your doctor. I didn't say whether your doctor said 4 or 5. Tran looked at her. Carter. Get home when you're ready, she said. That's all that matters. She stayed for 15 minutes. When she left, Sandra walked her to the door of the facility and said quietly so that it was just between them, he talks about you all the time, about the kind of commander you are, about the fact that he trusts you. She looked at Maya directly. A man like James doesn't say that easily. I want you to know that it means something, that it has always meant something. Maya looked at her. He's a remarkable soldier, she said. You have a remarkable family. Because of people like you, Sandra said, because he comes home. Maya walked back across the base. She had 3 operational planning meetings in the afternoon. She had a call with the JAG office at 1400. She had personnel reviews for 2 junior operators who were up for advancement and who deserved her full attention and would get it. She had work. She had always had work. But between the medical facility and her office, she stopped. She stopped walking and stood still for a moment in the middle of the path. She thought about something Okafor had said the previous day, that she had exposed a gap between what the institution said it valued and what it actually did, that now people were going to have to look at that gap and decide what to do about it. She had been thinking about that since he said it, turning it over, examining it from different angles. What she had come to standing here in the morning with Sandra Tran's letter against her chest was this: the gap was not new. It had always been there. It would always be there in some form in every institution that had ever existed, because institutions are made of people and people are imperfect. And the distance between the values you announce and the values you practice is something that has to be closed actively, continuously, every single day by the people inside the institution who choose to close it. It closes one decision at a time, one radio call at a time, one refusal to follow an order that would kill your people, one willingness to stand in front of a panel and say, yes, I refused it and I would refuse it again. One document filed through proper channels. One letter from a wife who needed to say thank you in writing because the words were too important to leave unsaid. One commander, one team, 34 badges on a table. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. Not through grand reforms or sweeping institutional change, though those mattered too. Primarily through individual people in individual moments, making individual decisions to be the person the moment required. She thought about Kim, 26 years old, sitting across from her in the mess hall, telling her that he hadn't known what he would have done if she hadn't made the call first. Someday, Kim was going to be the one making the call. I was going to be the one in the dark with insufficient information and a superior officer on the radio and a team behind him. And what he had seen this week was going to be part of what he carried into that moment. She could not control what he did with it, but she had given him something real to carry. That was what leadership actually was. Not the decisions that made the news. Not the moments that ended up in recommendations and promotion folders and Senate committee briefings. The transmission, the thing that passes from one person to the next, from one generation of operators to the next, the understanding demonstrated, rather than declared, that there is a way to do this job that holds the line between effectiveness and humanity, between mission accomplishment and moral accountability, between following orders and following your conscience. She had held that line. She walked into her office. She sat at her desk. She opened her first file of the day. 2 weeks later, Richard Hayes appeared before a formal military tribunal. The charges against him had expanded significantly from the original inquiry. The IG investigation had confirmed that he had actively participated in shaping intelligence products before they reached operational planning levels. 3 contractors had provided testimony. 2 former analysts had come forward with documentation. The picture that emerged was not of a single moment of self-serving judgment, but of a systematic practice of information control that had been building for years. Hayes entered a plea that his legal team had negotiated carefully. He did not go to trial. He accepted a reduction in rank forfeiture of a significant portion of his retirement benefits in a formal letter of censure that would be the permanent capstone of his military record. He left the service 60 days later in a ceremony that no one attended by choice, only by obligation. He made no public statement. Maya heard about the outcome from Diana Reyes, who sent a brief message at midday. She read between meetings. She thought about it for 30 seconds. She sent back, "Thank you for everything." Then she went to her next meeting. 6 weeks after Silent Horizon James Tran went home. He left on a Tuesday. Maya drove him to the departure point herself. Sandra had flown in 2 days earlier and was waiting. Emma was with Sandra, 7 years old, red sneakers, a drawing in her hand that she had been working on since the first one. When Tran got out of the vehicle, Emma ran to him. Maya watched from 10 feet away. She did not belong in that moment. That moment was entirely theirs. She stood at the edge of it and let it be what it was. Then Emma, still holding her father's hand, looked over at Maya. She walked over the way 7-year-olds walk, with complete directness and no social hesitation, and held out the drawing. Maya took it. It was the helicopter again. Better than the first one, more detailed, the proportions worked on. And in the door of the helicopter, a figure with a specific characteristic, a badge drawn carefully on the chest. Above the helicopter, in handwriting that was better than the first letter, but still recognizably a child's commander, Maya, spelled correctly this time. Maya looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Emma. "Thank you," she said. Emma looked at her with the directness that children have before the world teaches them to look away. "My dad says you always come home," she said. Maya looked at her. "That's the job," she said. Emma seemed satisfied with this. She turned and went back to her father and took his hand, and the three of them walked together toward the terminal, and Maya watched them go until she couldn't see them anymore. She drove back to base alone. She had a briefing at 1400. She had personnel reviews at 1600. She had a training evaluation running at 1730 that she needed to observe. She had her team. She had her work. She had the daily, ongoing, never-finished practice of being the commander her people deserved. She drove through the gate and showed her badge to the guard and parked and walked into the building. Nathan Brooks was in the hallway. He fell into step beside her without saying anything. "How's Tran?" he said after a moment. "He's home," she said. Brooks nodded. That was enough. They walked down the hallway together toward the work that was always waiting toward the next mission and the next decision and the next moment that would ask them who they were and whether they were willing to pay the price of being it. Maya Carter knew her answer. She had always known her answer, and she walked toward it without hesitation, the way she walked toward everything that mattered with her eyes open, her people behind her and not a single step taken backward. That was what it meant to lead. That was what it had always meant, and she would never stop proving it.